Hey guys, I'm just chilling here, relaxing at the beach, catching some waves, drinking some soda, getting a little vitamin C. But I think we both know that's a lie. This is clearly just a tarp that has the beach on it. The light is clearly just my light fixtures for the video. This orange was clearly bought from the store. Actually, I'm allergic to oranges, so I couldn't even eat it if it was. And this soda can is completely empty. What I've actually been doing is staying inside, and I've been catching up on my reading. One of the most interesting books that I've read in this time is The Anatomy of a Metahuman. It's a book published by DC Comics in 2018 that goes through essentially the hypothetical anatomy of some of their most famous characters. And as I'm looking through it, I realize that some of these characters, they're not as human as the name metahuman applies. People like Swamp Thing, Darkseid, and Doomsday that really bend the limits of what life can actually be considered. And that got me thinking, what actually is life? Now, the first character to actually come to mind when discussing how to quantify life is Vision. This not only because he's a very topical character nowadays with his Disney Plus show coming out later this year, but also because he sort of blurs the line between human and android already. He's clearly created by Ultron, but he has more human-like expressions, such as his relationship with the Scarlet Witch. Now, to quantify if he is life, we first have to quantify what we think life is. Now, I'm sure all of you at home have very different interpretations of what life is, but for my purposes, I'll be using the definition outlined in the Levine biology textbook. This is because this is the closest thing to an official source I could actually find, and it's echoed across many other sources that I checked. There are actually 8 criteria to consider when considering if something is alive or not. The first one is having a universal genetic code. In humans and every other living being we know of, that's DNA. DNA is made of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. It makes up every single thing about you, from the color of your hair, to your height, to your likelihood for certain genetic diseases. Now, computers are something very similar to that. It's called binary. Binary, as you can see scrolling across my computer, is the smallest form of information a computer can process. This makes up everything from the sounds you can hear, to the pictures you see, to even the video games you play. So depending on how you look at it, Vision technically gets a pass on this one. The next criteria we're going to be looking at is if something is made of cells. Cells are the macro building blocks of life, which not only contain DNA, but other organelles such as the nucleus and the mitochondria, which help your body function. Now, to many of you this may seem like a dead end, because clearly only organic things have cells in them. Metals such as iron and vibranium, if that existed, wouldn't have cells in them. But there's actually a loophole here. In the comics, Vision isn't actually made from scratch. He's made from the body of the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond. Jim Hammond, for those of you who don't know, was actually a robot. You can actually see a nod to his robotic body in the original Iron Man movie. What's interesting about Jim Hammond is that he wasn't actually made of metal. He was made of these things called Horton cells. Horton cells themselves are a whole other can of worms, but the gist is that they are synthetic human cells made of plastic and carbon polymers, which are, in fact, compatible with human cells and can survive together. So technically, yes, Vision is made of a type of cell. This connection to the Human Torch actually helps with our next criteria. We've seen inside Vision's body on a number of occasions, and actually found that wires and other components found in general machinery are inside. As anyone who's worked with or really ever used a computer before knows, they're very prone to overheat if a fan or other cooling device is not used. Now, because the Human Torch actually sets himself on fire, there needs to be some sort of mechanism maintaining a stable internal body temperature to make sure those components don't overheat. And that's actually one of our criteria. The next criteria we'll be looking at is actually if something can respond to the environment. It's essentially your fight or flight response. And considering Vision can both fight and flight, I'd say this is squarely in the yes category. But let's take a look at this clip real quick. In the MCU, where many of you probably know Vision from, he has an Infinity Stone in the slot on his forehead. It's what powers him and what allows him to use this laser attack. Not so much in the comics. In the comics, that gem is actually replaced with something called a solar jewel. The jewel allows Vision to collect solar energy and use it to power his processes, not unlike how plants use chloroplasts to achieve the same goal. Except even more efficient, because Vision uses his energy with 99% efficiency. The next two criteria actually go hand in hand. The first is that an organism must be able to change and adapt in accordance to its environment. This first one is very easy to apply to Vision. This because we can see him change both his mannerisms and his physical body depending on the situation he's in. The second one is a bit more tricky. An organism must be able to adapt and change over generations, which is evolution. But I actually found a technicality that could give Vision this point. It's called the genetic breeding model of computer learning. In the genetic breeding model, the user creates one algorithm which creates a generation of other algorithms. Those algorithms then take a test, and whichever algorithm performs the best on this test is used as the basis for the next generation of algorithms. I'll leave a few videos down below to explain this more in depth, but that's the gist of it. This is very likely the model of learning that Vision uses, because he even states in a solo run that his children's brains are not yet done developing, which leads me to believe it's a very similar learning model to the genetic breeding model. But speaking of kids, that's kind of where this all breaks down. The last criteria for an organism to be considered living is that they must be able to reproduce. And while Vision created 2 children, that's kind of like me making a puzzle and saying that puzzle is my child. And while he did technically have 2 human children, those are just creations by Scarlet Witch. So where does that leave us? A few yeses, a few technicallys, and a no? Is Vision actually considered life from that? Well, to answer that question, that takes us back to here. Now, as we discussed earlier, I'm clearly not at a beach, right? Well, why not? I can see palm trees, there's light, I have fruit, and I even have some water. But most people wouldn't consider me at a beach. Just like most people wouldn't consider a virus, who exhibits many of the traits that are considered to be life, isn't often considered life. So the question of is Vision life really boils down to this. Am I at a beach right now? Or is it just close enough?